Harrison Ford stopped mid-sentence. Jimmy Fallon didn't know what to do. And then everyone in the studio started crying. It was supposed to be just another Thursday night episode. Another Hollywood legend promoting another blockbuster. Another round of laughs. Another viral clip for social media. But sometimes, television gives you something you can't script. Sometimes, in the middle of all the lights and cameras and careful planning, real life walks onto the stage and changes everything. This is the story of the night Harrison Ford broke down on The Tonight Show. The night Jimmy Fallon discovered that behind one of Hollywood's toughest exteriors was a wound that had never healed. The night a single word unlocked 30 years of silence. And it all started so normally. The Tonight Show's studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy. Audience members filed into their seats, phones out, excited to see Jimmy Fallon in person. The Roots were warming up, instruments humming with that familiar late-night show rhythm. Producers scurried around with clipboards, checking lighting, sound levels, camera angles. Everything had to be perfect. In his dressing room, Harrison Ford sat quietly, reading through the pre-interview notes. At 81 years old, he'd done thousands of these appearances. He knew the drill: come out, tell a funny story about the new movie, play a game maybe, wave goodbye. Simple. Professional. Controlled. That's how Harrison Ford had always operated, controlled. For decades, he'd been Hollywood's most private leading man. While other actors overshared on talk shows, Harrison kept his personal life locked away. He answered questions about movies, not about himself. He was Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Jack Ryan, but never really Harrison Ford. Jimmy Fallon, on the other hand, was the opposite. His whole brand was built on genuine connection, on breaking down walls, on finding the human moment in every interview. His staff knew that Jimmy prepared differently than other hosts. He didn't just read press notes, he researched deeply. He looked for the story behind the story. And for Harrison Ford's appearance, Jimmy had found something. Something in an old interview from 1991. Something that made Jimmy pause when he read it, made him mark the page, made him think. If the moment's right, I need to ask about this. But what Jimmy didn't know was that this wasn't just a forgotten interview answer. This was Harrison Ford's deepest regret. And bringing it up would shatter the careful armor the actor had built over 3 decades. The show opened as it always did. Jimmy's monologue landed well, jokes about politics, pop culture, the absurdity of daily life. The audience laughed, clapped, rode the energy. Then came the commercial break, and backstage, a producer knocked on Harrison's dressing room door. "Mr. Ford, you're up in 2 minutes." Harrison stood, straightened his jacket, took a breath. Another show. Another interview. Another carefully controlled public appearance. The Tonight Show band played him out. The audience erupted in applause. Harrison Ford walked onto that stage with the same confidence he'd had for 50 years in front of cameras, steady, unshakable, present but guarded. Jimmy greeted him with genuine warmth. They shook hands. Harrison settled into the guest chair, and the interview began exactly as everyone expected. They talked about the new movie, an action thriller that had Harrison doing his own stunts again, because of course he was. The audience laughed at Jimmy's impression of Harrison's famous finger-pointing gesture. They watched a clip. Everything was textbook late-night television. Then, about 12 minutes in, Jimmy shifted in his chair. He had that look, the one his producers recognized. The look that meant he was about to go off script. "Harrison, can I ask you something personal?" Jimmy's voice changed. Not louder but deeper. More present. Harrison's expression flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression of caution. "You can ask," he said. "I might not answer." The audience chuckled. Classic Harrison Ford deflection. But Jimmy didn't laugh. He leaned forward instead. "I was reading an old interview you did in 1991. You were talking about your father. And you said something that stuck with me." In the audience, you could feel the energy shift. People stopped fidgeting. The Roots went still. Even the cameras seemed to lean in closer. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He nodded slowly. Go on. You said your father died before you could tell him you understood him. Before you could tell him that you finally got it, why he was the way he was. Jimmy paused. And you said you'd give anything to say one word to him? Just one word. The studio went completely silent. Harrison Ford's face, usually so controlled, began to crack. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. What happened next, no one in that studio saw coming. Harrison Ford, the man who'd played the toughest characters in cinema history, the actor who never broke character, never showed vulnerability in public, his hands started to shake. He looked down at his lap. His lips pressed together. And when he looked back up at Jimmy Fallon, his eyes were wet. The word was Dad, Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. I never called him Dad. I called him Father. Always formal. Always distant. And by the time I understood why, by the time I understood that he was just scared, just doing his best with what he knew, it was too late. Jimmy Fallon didn't interrupt. Didn't crack a joke to ease the tension. Didn't do any of the things a talk show host normally does when things get uncomfortable. He just sat there, present, listening. He died in 1993, Harrison continued, and now his voice was breaking. 2 years after that interview. And I thought I'd have time. I thought I'd have a moment where I could sit with him and just say, Dad, I get it now. I'm a father too, and I understand. The camera stayed on Harrison's face. In the control room, the director made a split-second decision. Don't cut away. Don't go to commercial. Don't protect the audience from this moment. Let it happen. But I never got that moment, Harrison said. I was on location. Filming. And I got the call that he'd had a heart attack. By the time I got home, he was already gone. A woman in the third row of the audience was crying. Then another. Then a man in the balcony. The Tonight Show studio, usually filled with laughter, had become something else entirely, a sacred space of shared grief. Jimmy Fallon's eyes were red too. He swallowed hard. And then he did something that broke every rule of late-night television. He stood up from behind his desk. The Roots watched in silence. The audience held their breath. Jimmy walked around the desk, walked across the space between host and guest, that carefully designed distance that keeps interviews professional, and he knelt down beside Harrison Ford's chair. Harrison, Jimmy said quietly, but his microphone caught it. I lost my mom in 2017. And I never got to tell her that her sacrifices weren't in vain. That every difficult moment she went through to raise us, I saw it. I understood it. Harrison looked at Jimmy, and something passed between them that transcended television, transcended celebrity, transcended everything artificial about the entertainment industry. It was just two men, two sons, sharing the weight of words left unsaid. I think they know, Jimmy said. I think somehow they know. Harrison nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so human, so vulnerable, so unlike any moment Harrison Ford had ever shown on camera before. The audience began to applaud. Not the enthusiastic, excited applause of entertainment, but something slower, deeper, the applause of recognition, of shared humanity, of witnessing something true. But Jimmy held up his hand, and the applause stopped. He wasn't done. Harrison, would you do something with me? Jimmy asked. Harrison looked at him, confused, vulnerable, waiting. Jimmy stood up and walked to his desk. He pulled open a drawer and took out a simple index card and a pen. He walked back to Harrison and handed them to him. Write it, Jimmy said. Write the word. Write Dad. The studio went so silent you could hear the air conditioning humming. Harrison stared at the blank card in his hands. His fingers trembled as he picked up the pen. For a moment, it seemed like he might not do it, like the walls would go back up, like Harrison Ford the movie star would return and shut down Harrison Ford the human being. But then he started writing. Just 3 letters. DD. But the way his hand moved across that card, slow, deliberate, heavy with 3 decades of regret, made those 3 letters feel like the most important word ever written on the Tonight Show stage. When he finished, Harrison held the card in both hands, staring at it. His shoulders shook. A tear fell onto the card, smudging the ink slightly. Jimmy knelt beside him again. "He heard you," Jimmy whispered. "Somehow, somewhere, he heard you." And that's when Harrison Ford broke completely. This man who'd faced down Nazis as Indiana Jones, who'd navigated asteroid fields as Han Solo, who'd played presidents and heroes and unshakable men of action, he sobbed. Not quiet tears. Not dignified grief. He sobbed like a child, like someone who'd been holding on to pain for so long that releasing it felt like breaking apart. And Jimmy Fallon, who built his career on making people laugh, on viral bits and celebrity games and keeping things light, wrapped his arms around Harrison Ford and let him cry. The cameras kept rolling. The Roots stayed silent. The audience didn't applaud, didn't cheer, didn't make a sound. They just witnessed. How long did it last? Maybe 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. Time felt different in that moment, like the normal rules of television had been suspended and something more important was happening. When Harrison finally pulled back, when he wiped his face with the tissue that a producer had quietly handed to Jimmy, he looked at the camera. Not at Jimmy, at the camera. Which meant he was looking at everyone watching at home. "If your father is still alive," Harrison said, his voice rough and raw, "call him Dad. Even if it feels awkward. Even if you've never done it before. Even if he doesn't know how to respond. Say it. Because you don't know when you'll run out of chances." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The interview didn't continue. There was no witty transition back to promoting the movie, no game to play, no attempt to lighten the mood. Jimmy simply said, "Harrison Ford, everybody." And the audience rose to their feet, not in entertainment applause, but in the kind of standing ovation reserved for moments that transcend performance. As Harrison stood to leave, Jimmy stopped him one more time. "Keep the card," Jimmy said. Harrison looked down at the index card in his hand, at the 3 letters written in his own handwriting, slightly smudged from his tears. "I will," Harrison said. And he walked off the Tonight Show stage carrying that card like it was the most precious thing he'd ever held. Behind the scenes, the producers didn't know what to do. Network executives were calling. Was this going to air? Could they air this? It was so raw, so unpolished, so unlike anything that had ever happened on late-night television. Jimmy made the call. "We air it exactly as it happened. No edits. No cuts. People need to see this." When the episode aired that night, social media exploded. Not with jokes or memes or snarky commentary, but with stories. Thousands of people sharing their own regrets about parents, about words left unsaid, about the complexity of father-son relationships. #CallHimDad started trending. Not as a joke, not as a challenge, but as a genuine movement of people reaching out to their fathers, saying the words they'd been too proud or too scared or too stubborn to say. Harrison Ford's publicist released a statement the next day. "Mr. Ford thanks Jimmy Fallon and The Tonight Show for creating a space where truth could be shared. He hopes that by sharing his regret, others might avoid carrying the same burden." But the real statement came 3 weeks later. Harrison Ford appeared on The Tonight Show again, unscheduled, unannounced. He walked out during the monologue, surprising Jimmy mid-joke. The audience went wild with recognition and excitement. But Harrison didn't sit in the guest chair this time. He stood next to Jimmy's desk, and he pulled something from his jacket pocket. The index card. The one with "Dad" written on it. "I've carried this every day since that night," Harrison told Jimmy, told the audience, told everyone watching. "And I want to show you something." He turned the card over. On the back, in the same handwriting, he'd written dozens of other words. Proud. Grateful. Sorry. Love. Forgive. Understand. "I've been writing down all the other words I never said," Harrison explained. "Every day, I add another one. And it's not the same as saying them to him. But it's something. It's a conversation I'm finally having, even if it's one-sided. Jimmy's eyes filled with tears again. The audience was silent, moved beyond applause. Thank you for that night, Harrison said, looking directly at Jimmy. You gave me permission to finally say what I needed to say. They embraced. No jokes. No transitions. Just two men who understood that some moments are too sacred for entertainment. That index card now lives in Harrison Ford's wallet. He's shown it in interviews since, always with the same message: don't wait. Say the words. Call him Dad. Because some words, once left unsaid, echo forever. And sometimes, on a late-night talk show stage, a host creates a space where those words can finally be spoken, even if it's 30 years too late.